Good evening, Internet. On this episode, we're going to talk about the body work that I've had to do on this thing, or that I chose to do on this thing. We have the front panels off right now, and they've been off the car for a couple months now. Feels like forever. And we have them up on this kind of stand here. It's made them relatively easy to work on. We have not one, but both fenders up on this thing. And partly why, actually the primary reason why, these are being really annoying. Yeah, they do that. I just bought this house. Whenever it's really cold, they don't turn on properly, and they just flicker forever. Super duper annoying. Primary reason that I mounted these like right next to each other like this is because this was in an accident. Like, this whole car was in a front end accident at one point, and this was absolutely crushed and destroyed. I'll throw some pictures up right now, but I spent weeks slowly learning about bending it back and massaging it, and then 2 weeks ago I threw down some filler on top of the crusty metal. So I bet if we look under here, yeah, it's not that smooth from underneath. From up top, it's actually getting pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with it. We completely lost this line, and really this line as well, and this curve, and it lost like all of its original geometry. So this is what we're aiming for. So this is why I mounted it side by side, is so that we can reference and see, you know, how are we doing? And I've got it pretty damn perfect, honestly, for how it looked like. Just using hand tools and smashing it back and using a little bit of Bondo. I think it's going to look pretty good by the time it's done. So yeah, I threw down some filler, and we've been just doing a combination of filler and filler primer and spot putty just to get the shape back perfect. What I've been doing is, whenever I think I have it smooth, I'll hit it with another layer of primer, and it gets all nice and glossy whenever it's wet, and then I can look at it and see what it'll kind of look like whenever it's hit with clear coat and whenever it's fully done. And I can tell if something's going to drive me nuts later. Like, I noticed that in this corner there was kind of a dent still, so I threw some spot putty on it. Really not the right thing. You can see that it cracked a bunch, but we're just procedurally throwing stuff on there, sanding it down, painting it, seeing what it looks like. And eventually we'll get there, and then we'll paint it. The reason that I'm choosing not to paint these entire panels is mostly money. Eventually I might throw a couple grand painting this car or wrapping this car, but what I really want to do here is seal up the rust so the rust stops getting worse. I obviously didn't do these areas just for fun. These were rusty. So I used a whole bunch of things in my arsenal to sand and rust convert and prime and build up and smooth and flatten and yada yada yada, all of these areas. So there's here, here, here. Long story why it's partially painted. Not really. The Canadian Tire was out of stock and I only bought one can and I ran out. So this is kind of where we stopped until I can get more cans in. This is an area that is currently done. So this used to be a big old rusty spot, and this used to be a big old rusty spot. With this lighting, you can't really tell that anything is up, but let's see if I can embarrass myself here. Yeah, you can kind of tell it's a little bit different right there. It's not going to be perfect, and I know it's not going to be perfect, but the goal is to stop the rust and to get it smooth. One thing that annoys me about this is this paint has an incredibly thick layer of primer. So this white layer is incredibly thick, and you can't just like prime over this and paint it and clear coat it and have it be smooth. You'll notice like a lot. It looks like you might be able to get away with it, but I tried and I really was not pleased with it. You could tell looking at it that it was sunk down a little bit because it doesn't have this 0.5 millimeter, I'm exaggerating, of friggin' primer. So what I've been doing is experimenting with filler primer and using it with a brush as well as spraying it on for larger areas to build these up just that little bit so I can sand it and then it will actually be smooth. So what we've done here is pretty much exactly that. This is pretty much done. So the red is the primer that I have sanded to the same kind of plane, the same level that it's supposed to be. And I did that, I did that with this one, and I did that, and I did not do it with this one. So I left this one, so maybe you can tell. Yeah. So that annoyed me. Maybe I am a perfectionist, but maybe that's reasonable. I don't know. I want it to be a looker whenever it's done. So at least in this kind of light, you can't tell that anything's up. Not that anybody's like staring at this particular part of the front fender. So let's take a look at the other side. And hopefully not whack this off of anything. Here's how the other side's going. This has been an incredible amount of work because of the super thick layer of primer and because of the fact that I don't want to be able to see that height difference, if that makes any sense. So this has been hit with a layer of primer, many layers of primer, like a ton of layers of primer, just in this one spot. And I use the old paper mask trick where you cut out, here's like a bunch of them that I was using, where you cut out a section. This is, what are the chances of that? I grabbed the exact one. So you tape this over in such a way that the paper is not resting on the surface. It has to be up just a little bit, like 2 or 3 millimeters is ideal. And that will allow you to spray a small area, so you're not making your repair area massive when you do that. And you don't get a hard line as if you just taped it down. So that saves you some work there. So the process that I've found works for this involves spraying on all those layers of primer as I just described, and then very carefully, using my own patented technique, take a razor blade and scrape only the top layer, only what's above this line that you see here. And if you made the layers of primer thick enough, then eventually everything will flatten out, and then you can give it a light sand to make it perfect. What'll happen is if you do this, you put all this primer on, and then you use sandpaper, is you're gonna get this top part, but you're also gonna get the bottom part as well, which you don't want to touch at all. You want to leave this completely untouched, and you want it to just come up to the existing level of the paint. So if that made no sense, that's all right. I'm gonna record myself doing it, and maybe it'll make sense. Maybe you'll think I'm an idiot for taking a razor blade in my paint, but this is what I found works. So after that, it's a lot better. We might be a little bit short on the primer, but I think it's going to be in the realm of good enough. It feels pretty smooth by the hand. You really can't feel any sort of a jump. Of course, there's a bit of a texture difference. And if you're ever wondering if texture in your primer will show through to your top coat, it will, in my experience. So we're going to do some sanding to this whole thing. I'm not sure what grit I'm going to use. Maybe some 800, maybe some 1500, something like that. I kind of pimped out my card a little bit. We've got a little bit of pegboard here. Right now, specifically for our sandpaper, we got some 320, some 800, some 1500, some 3000, some 2000. Alright, so after that little bit of work, this is now looking a lot better. So there's a massive reflectivity difference, and there's also still a little bit of texture in this just from building up so many layers, but it's pretty minimal now that I've sanded it. What we're going to do is hit this with one last thin burst of primer that slightly goes around the edge of this, because I've noticed that, maybe we really should add another layer or two and just sand down those, because those are going to be rather visible. I can tell, even just looking through the camera, it kind of makes it even more noticeable. Yeah, we'll do that. Alright, welcome to my paint booth. Sometimes this gets used as a bathroom, but primarily it is a paint booth. So the reason that I have this in the bathroom is because, one, it blocks the fumes from the rest of the house. Two, there's actual fume extraction built into the room. We got a window for getting fresh air in here. And that is pretty much it. And my bathroom is kind of bigger than it needs to be. So plenty of room for me to hang some clothes and also paint some stuff. And so far, haven't gotten any paint on anything that I haven't wanted to so far, so that's a plus. And yeah, what we're gonna do right now is throw a couple extra coats on this to try and get rid of that texture, because that texture is gonna persist through to the clear coat if we don't do something about it. See, earlier I was mentioning how you can kind of get a better feel for the texture whenever it's wet like that. And whenever you have to add a million layers of primer, you can kind of use that to your advantage for when you're doing stuff like this. So you can hit it. Making it extra thick is not really an issue. In fact, it's kind of to your advantage. It kind of hides minor imperfections a little bit more, builds it up. And it lets you see as if it were wet and shiny and glossy, which is convenient. So this stuff dries awfully fast. That was a little thick, but are we getting rid of the features? Sure are. Slowly. So that will probably do it. Then we can sand it, and then we'll hit it again, then we'll hit it again, then we'll hit it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Alright, well that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to document some of the things that I'm doing with the bodywork and the approaches that I'm trying out. And one other thing that I'd like to include in this video, because it's too exciting not to, is this haul of parts that came from Rock Auto today. So look at what we got. We got 2 drums, 2 front rotors, hardware for the front rotors, or for the calipers and stuff, bearing seals, Timkens are bearing seals as well, bearings themselves, sway bar linkages, I think that's what those are, mine are looking pretty crusty, new fuel pump. Notice that the fuel pump on the vehicle, well, it smells like gas for one thing, it's also hanging very close to the ground because its mount is rusted. It's actually one of the first things I noticed about the vehicle before I even bought it, is that it is hanging, like, basically scraping against the ground, the fuel pump. So that's not good. So it was 20 bucks. So I figured I'd get a new one. We got new suspension bushings. So this is most of the suspension bushings, not every single one on the car, but the important ones. Spending all that time looking at the rear fender, I really can't ignore the crappy rubber that is back there for bushings. So we're gonna make it look all nice and new, and I feel like all this stuff is just due diligence for buying a 1983 sports car and expecting to drive it around and be half reliable and not ride like crap. We got new brake pads, new brake shoes, we got a new air filter from Bosch, and that is it. All this stuff from Rock Auto was so cheap. It was like $700 Canadian shipped to my door, I think. And that is legendarily good. Like, these were like 15 bucks. These were like 20 or 25 bucks. Like, for a big ass chunk of metal, man. Like, that's a good deal. Half the time when you buy rotors, like, if you go to Mazda and you ask for a brake rotor, it's like 130 bucks for like my Mazda 6. And this is $15. I'm all about it. Like, all these things were so cheap. These bearings were like $4 a piece. These seals were like $3. This was 75 bucks, probably the most expensive thing. And yeah, we got all sorts of goodies to throw on there, but we're gonna wait until it's not as covered in snow. Can you see it out there right now at all? You can see its butt. Its cold little butt.